we have a session called The Awakening of MENA Gaming, Empowering Talent, Harnessing Tech, and Making Markets. And to host that, we've got Ahmed Sharif from Sandsoft. So please take it away. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Testing, testing. Yes, working. Hey, Max. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. Thanks for the introduction. So very quickly, we're going to be talking about MENA a little bit. And the main kind of goal of this is not to just be another MENA presentation. There's been a lot of those. Many before me and I'm sure many after me. The goal, though, is to be a little bit telling about my story, about how I came into the MENA market, and my journey into it, and why I personally chose to take the leap, going from over 20 years in North America and the EU gaming industry, and into MENA. On a more serious note, I got a ton of LinkedIn messages asking me this question: why MENA? Why Middle East? Why the Gulf? So it'll be nice if they stop coming my way. Hopefully, this presentation solves that once and for all. So, really quick kind of breakdown of what we're going to be talking about, rough introduction of myself, then going into three main areas: the market, tech, and talent, and kind of sharing my criterion for why I think the MENA market is the place to be. And if we have time, some Q&A at the end. So, who am I? Well, I'm the CTO of Sandsoft. I've joined semi-recently, and this is a quick collage of where I've been and what I've done. I began my career in the mobile game space, up in Scotland, in Dundee, and I had been working on various titles, founded my own startup with a small team, learned a lot of lessons from that, and then moved on to platform development. So working on Sony R&D, on the PlayStation 4, mainly as a graphics and rendering engineer. That was always been my forte. Since then, I've kind of been bouncing between both platforms and making games themselves. Here's another quick collage of all the things I've worked on, and you can see it's quite a mix. AAA titles, mobile games, platforms, consoles, headsets, consumer electronics. And my journey is really taking me around the world, UK, Sweden, California, Washington, and especially during my time at EA, where I was technical director for the Need for Speed franchise, and at Meta, where I headed up the VR, AR, and Metaverse division there for platform engineering. I learned a ton about global markets. From an engineering perspective, initially I thought it wouldn't be very relevant to me, but in fact, as you'll soon find out, I learned it was very relevant. So, more recently I joined Sandsoft, and this is quite a departure from what you'd expect a regular career trajectory like mine to look like. And again, I got a ton of questions as to why MENA? Why did you take that leap? And this is what I mean. My LinkedIn inbox was really seriously flooded when the news went public. I was surprised, particularly by my American friends and colleagues who just really didn't understand. They couldn't compute. So my LinkedIn inbox was certainly not prepared. So why did I make the move? And it kind of began as an enigma for me. Throughout my career, I had gone to, again, working at very large corporations, shipping very large games and products. And MENA had always been this big blob of landmass and people that we just kind of overlooked. We were always straddling between the two big twins of EU and North America, and just hopped over a little bit and focused the rest of our energy on Asia. That was always the status quo for at least a good 10, 15 years or so, especially in the early 2000s. I just took it for what it was. I never really questioned it, never really dug into it. At least for me, all the companies I'd worked for had generally kept MENA as a periphery or secondary market, not really much attention. And this was my perception. Well, it's just deserts and camels, right? I mean, what else is there? MENA is not really known for its, well, the media is not entirely friendly to the region, and most of the time when we think about MENA, we think these kind of images. And by and large, rather than accepting the norm, over my career I began to become more and more curious. And I soon found out I was very wrong. There's a lot more to deserts, well, to MENA than just deserts and camels. To be clear, there are camels. They're everywhere, and even next to very tall skyscrapers. But more importantly, I began digging deeper into the market itself. I wanted to understand, how does it compare? What is gaming like over there? If MENA was truly an emerging market with all this potential and blah, 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 I needed to see that the demand for gaming should be high, right? And the spend on gaming should be going up. And what I quickly learned was that it was a very, very appealing market. So what are the two things that personally, for me, attracted me to the area? The first one was the eagerness to experiment. I was surprised to know that MENA has one of the world's youngest, most youthful populations, which means that, by and large, over 60% of the region is under 30 years old. That is extremely young. So that means that they're generally very heavily inclined towards digital entertainment, with over 70% of the population playing games, specifically mobile games. That is not normal by global standards. And more relevantly, the demand has consistently outstripped supply. So if we look at a snapshot in 2017, total revenue in the region was only about 1.1 billion. That's quite small. In less than 10 years, that's got a 7x to almost 7 billion. That's really crazy growth, really crazy growth. And in part, that's because of the sheer number of gamers in the region. And visualizing it like this, it really gives you a sense of how MENA stacks up to the previous juggernauts that we're used to working with in the games industry. MENA is almost as large as Europe from a gamer's perspective, and that number is changing. It's growing every day. I would say it's not quite as saturated as Europe or the American markets are. More importantly, if you look at the game consumer spend, it's been going up. In 2018, it's unheard of to see an economy spend 700 million in in-game mobile consumer spend. This is from our friends over at data.ai. And in the space of 3 years, double to 1.7 billion. That is, again, not normal. And sorry, colleagues, I know I promised I wouldn't put a meme in here, but I couldn't resist. It is quite bizarre, the level of growth that the region is seeing from a gaming perspective. And the Boston Consulting Group tends to agree, not just them, but many others. They also cited the very young population, and they've also done some further data modeling to suggest that it's growing by 25% year on year. That is, for what it's worth, 3 times faster than China, which is about 8% year on year. So even from an Asian perspective, the market is becoming very, very, very appealing. And to add some additional information, 50% of all the apps downloaded in the region are games. That again exceeds what is the normal global standard of 40%. So people are using their phones, on average, majority for gaming. So here I was. I finally understood that the market is a ripe, fresh, open field. But so what? I mean, I'll be honest, there's been plenty of cases of markets that had high demand. But there are other factors that have to be in place for it to actually be relevant. If we look at, for example, other industries, there have been many, many examples of tech and otherwise where products have been in high demand, but the market could not actually sustain it or incubate that product due to infrastructure and other various reasons. So I had to understand how the community adopted tech. What was the region's mindset towards technology? Gaming being a technical product, a technology product, I had to understand how serious they were around adopting new technologies. And bearing in mind, I'm not talking about inventing technology, I'm talking about harnessing it, or reusing it, or being willing to adopt it. They're 2 very different things. If the community did not care about this, then it suggested a very different mindset and a different market approach to what I was expecting. So why is technology uptake specifically important? Well, there are 3 main reasons. It drives innovation. When there's more adoption, there's going to be more use cases found for a certain technology. It reinforces market potential. Again, it's usually a pretty strong indicator of readiness to consume secondary or related products that depend on that technology. And of course, the multiplicative effect of the prior implies that there'll be new, unique experiences built with those foundational technologies. Here's an example of that. So this is from our friends over at Ericsson in the GCMA report of 2022. What's pretty surprising here is that the leading 5G market in the world, you would assume would be North America or Europe or even Asia. It's not, it's the Gulf states. They, by 2030, will have the highest adoption rate of 5G, and that's mobile connections, not infrastructure. So I was keen to understand how many people actually have physical access to 5G networks on their phone, on a day-to-day. And the Gulf states, specifically, will be at 95%. And the rest of MENA is quickly catching up. Emphasizing this further, looking at mobile data traffic per smartphone, today, well, rather last year, in 2022, 25 gigs on average was the consumption of the average mobile user in the Gulf. So they're heavily dependent on mobile data on their phones, and that eclipses Central Europe, Western Europe, North America, only tied with the Asian region. So this community is very engrossed in their mobile devices, and they're heavily relying upon them. These are all very interesting indicators for me as an engineer to know how receptive a community is to their mobile devices. And there's much more data, by the way, but I just couldn't fit it all into this presentation. I'm trying to focus specifically on mobile gaming, but there's a ton more around general console gaming and many other factors that were very, very interesting. So the last thing I wanted to look into was, if I was to categorize the last two slides as consumer uptake of technology, I wanted to see what external forces are doing in the actual region. So when I was at Meta, before Sandsoft, I was very aware of one of the largest Metaverse training centers that were being built in California. And that is today a kind of gold standard that we use to train people on Web3 technologies, VR, and AR tech as well. The second ever Metaverse Training Academy is in Saudi Arabia. That's the only other one in the world. That is pretty big, in my opinion. And not to mention, just 2 weeks ago, Google announced a brand new cloud region in Saudi Arabia. So that involves very large data centers and a ton of stuff. And not to mention Tencent, IBM, and Amazon, who have been also upping their investment in the region as well. So this are all strong indicators that when big technical companies who are trendsetters in the industry are investing heavily into core technological foundations in one of the largest markets, or rather largest growth markets in the world. Okay. The very last and final one that I cared about was the last ingredient of the cake, which is talent. You can have all the technology in the world, you can have all the funding in the world, but if you haven't got people to execute on your vision, it doesn't matter, right? To build an enterprise, to build a venture, you need to have people as the backbone of your success. And I'll be honest, this area was probably the least conclusive as far as my findings go, but I do have a thesis that I want to share with all of you. The two primary questions I wanted to answer here was this just a consumer economy, or was it a creator economy? Is there a trend that we're seeing here where people are not just using technology for the sake of it, but are they actually looking to produce and leverage and learn about this technology and maybe develop upon it? So there's something called the STI index, which stands for the Science, Technology, and Innovation Index. Broadly speaking, the MENA region has historically been, and still is today, a net importer of STI products and services. That's been the case for a very, very long time. And it's also been a net exporter of STI talent, which means that most scientists, researchers, technologists prefer to matriculate in Western institutions versus their own. So this, in my view, had to change. And there are a couple of factors that I think are important to justify or maybe predict if this change is actually happening in a certain region. But to answer that, I had to answer the question first of what creates talent. And there are three main factors: investment, education, and opportunity. Generally speaking, both throughout history and even in recent history, we know that you need these three things, and if they're all in place, then all that's left is time. If we look at investment, the MENA region is probably one of the hottest spots right now. $38 billion alone deployed behind Saudi Arabia's national esports and gaming strategy. Very few other governments have that kind of money behind a very singular industry. And it's also been driving 15% year-on-year growth, doubling European growth rates. Education is also necessary. And by and large, in my humble assessment, MENA is educationally flourishing in the sense that, here are a couple of examples. In Qatar alone, there are twice as many females enrolling into university than males. That is kind of weird by global standards. That's not usually the case, right? And if you look at academic endowments and investments into institutions, again, Saudi Arabia here tops the charts. 23.7 billion in endowments across major universities in the kingdom. Again, not normal, but these are all good indicators of change. And lastly, opportunity. You can have very educated people, but if they haven't got a chance to flex their muscle or a job to apply to or a company to work for and to aspire towards, it doesn't matter. So the multiplicative effect of both investment, in terms of startups, bringing other companies to the region, will hopefully create that. And there's actually pretty good historical precedent for this. I do believe MENA is starting to recalibrate itself back to its historical zenith. And to explain this a little bit more, some of you may be familiar with, Middle East's very, very essential role in science and technology. In fact, for the majority of human history, it's kind of a fact that it's pretty much been the center of all science and technology. And the fact that it was a net exporter of STI is only a very recent phenomenon. For the majority of human history, Middle East was probably the place to be when it came to learning sciences, medicine, mathematics, physics, technology, automation, robotics. This is not a normal state, as it were. My actual favorite story about this is if you go back to the Islamic Caliphate of, I think, 800 CE, you'll find that one of the leaders there, Harun al-Rashid, I believe his name is, built the famous House of Wisdom, or Bayt al-Hikmah in Arabic. This is, by far, in history, mankind's first millennium capital of human culture and science, one of the largest libraries in the world. And a nice story that I've read in a couple of books that talk about this part of history is how this empire motivated that kind of growth. And it was very simple, in fact. The leader of the empire would invite translators, authors, researchers, engineers from across the globe. And very simply, they would reward those researchers and various talent that came and migrated to the region with gold, equivalent to the weight of their books. And those are heavy books, like leather-bound, very thick books. So a lot of money and funding and financing went into this region to make that kind of achievement possible. Now, this is maybe a bit far back from a historical perspective, but there are other examples of this as well happening. The American aviation industry is a very, very good example of this, if there are any aviation buffs here in the audience. If we look at the North American Aviation Association, and you look at California, which is today the hub of all aviation, pretty much. California is regionally not a very good place to build an industry like that. It's very far away, awkward time zones, large deserts. Sound a bit familiar? There was a very distinct push by the American government, especially after World War I, to create this industry. And actually began with Theodore Roosevelt, at the time he was Assistant Secretary General to the Navy, to say, hey, we need to invest in aerospace. At the time, it was minimally used for airmail at best. But again, as a result of investment and various other means, such as legislation, acts of Congress, protecting the industry from legal and international disputes, heavy amounts of financing and funding, and incubation, you had cases like the Lockheed brothers migrating to California to form, as we know now, Lockheed, and later was merged to Lockheed Martin. You have Boeing, and so on. And funnily enough, a lot of historians theorize that it was the foundation of the aviation industry that gave birth to the silicon industry and then eventually Silicon Valley in the region. So there's a ton of history here, and I believe that if we look at these patterns throughout different industries, we can quite clearly see that a lot of the same principles are being taken in MENA today when it comes to gaming and technology. To summarize, I think after combing through all of this, I was pretty convinced. It was pretty clear that I wanted to be kind of a part of this journey. It's not often that you're a part of an industry that is booming and you're creating talent, companies, infrastructure from scratch. And I really wanted to kind of be not only a witness, but a part of the evolution of a region into a gaming powerhouse. Hopefully you found this insightful, and the deck has inspired you to look at, maybe a bit more closely into the region and some of the activities there and the industry and, within MENA. But more importantly, I hope people stop messaging me on LinkedIn now about why I decided to join Sandsoft. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you very much, Ahmed. Really appreciate that. I think there might not be time for questions, but of course, I'm sure if anyone has any burning questions, that you'll be able to take some right away, just outside. So, but yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.